The Arizona sun hung low in the sky, painting the desert landscape in hues of orange and crimson. The once celebrated actor, Keanu Reeves, leaned against the wooden railing of his modest farmhouse, sipping a cup of black coffee. His hands, calloused from years of working the land, gripped the warm ceramic as he gazed out at the sprawling fields he had cultivated with care. This wasn't a movie. There were no cameras, no directors yelling, "Cut." It was real. It was the life he had chosen. After decades in the spotlight, Keanu had walked away from Hollywood, trading red carpets for dirt roads and designer suits for dusty jeans. He bought a small ranch in the heart of Arizona, far from the noise of the world, and settled into the quiet solitude of farm life. He learned to till the soil, herd cattle, and mend fences. His days started before sunrise and ended with the glow of a lantern flickering on his porch. It was simple. It was peaceful. Until they came. It started with whispers in the nearby town of Black Rock. Stories of a private military company operating in the region, led by a ruthless ex-mercenary named Conrad Strickland. His men were little more than hired guns, enforcing their own twisted law. They extorted local businesses, took supplies at will, and demanded protection money from struggling farmers. Those who resisted didn't last long. Keanu had heard the warnings, but he had never been one to live in fear. His farm was his own, built with his own two hands. He had no interest in getting involved in whatever corruption festered in the town. But soon, the violence found its way to his doorstep. It was just after sundown when Keanu heard the rumble of approaching engines. Headlights cut through the darkness as a convoy of dust-covered pickup trucks rolled onto his land. The ranch dogs barked and growled, sensing the danger before Keanu even stepped off the porch. 5 men climbed out of the vehicles, their boots crunching against the gravel driveway. They were armed, some with handguns holstered at their sides, others with rifles slung across their backs. Their leader, a scarred man with a jagged smile, stepped forward. "You're the movie star, huh?" The man smirked, looking Keanu up and down. "Didn't take you for the farming type." Keanu said nothing, simply staring at the man with a calm that made the mercenary shift uncomfortably. "Here's the deal," the man continued, his tone hardening. "You live out here, you pay your share. We run things around here, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of that." The other men chuckled, as if this was all a joke. Keanu took a slow breath. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said evenly. "Good," the man nodded. "Then you'll pay up." Keanu glanced at the trucks, at the armed men waiting for an excuse to start something. He knew their type. They weren't here for negotiation. "How much?" Keanu asked. The man's smirk widened. "Everything you got." Keanu tightened his jaw. "I don't have much." The leader scoffed. "Then you better find some." The next moment happened too fast. One of the mercenaries stepped forward and swung the butt of his rifle into Keanu's ribs, sending him to his knees. Another kicked him hard in the gut. He gasped for breath, pain shooting through his torso. "We'll be back in a week," the leader said, watching Keanu struggle. "And next time, you'd better have what we ask for." They left as quickly as they had come, the roar of their engines fading into the night. Smoke curled into the sky as Keanu stared at the smoldering remains of his barn. They had torched it before leaving, just to make a point. For the first time in years, Keanu felt something he thought he had left behind. Rage. That night, Keanu sat on the porch, staring at the stars. He pressed a bag of ice to his ribs, feeling the bruises deepen. His mind wandered back to the years before the ranch, the years spent training for roles that demanded more than just acting. Most people assumed fight choreography was just for the movies. That actors only learned what they needed for the scene, then forgot it. But Keanu had always been different. He had trained in jiu-jitsu, judo, and close-quarters combat. He had spent months at the shooting range, learning how to clear rooms, reload under pressure, and fire with deadly precision. He wasn't John Wick. But he wasn't just a farmer either. If these men wanted a fight, he would give them one. Over the next few days, Keanu spent every waking moment preparing. He took what little money he had saved and drove to an old contact, a gunsmith who owed him a favor. He returned with a carefully selected arsenal, a semi-automatic rifle with a thermal scope, a shotgun for close encounters, and a pair of pistols holstered at his sides. He stocked up on ammunition, body armor, and survival gear. Then came the traps. Using the land to his advantage, he fortified the ranch with tripwires, mines, and hidden snares. He reinforced the main house, making it a fortress in the desert. Every approach was a potential death trap. By the time the week was up, Keanu Reeves was ready. And when the mercenaries returned, they would walk into hell. The wind howled through the Arizona desert, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and impending violence. The night was still, but Keanu Reeves could feel the storm approaching. He stood on the second-floor balcony of his farmhouse, scanning the horizon through the scope of his rifle. The time had come. A week had passed since the first encounter with Strickland's men. Keanu had spent every moment fortifying his land, making his farm a death trap for the mercenaries who would inevitably return. He had studied the terrain, memorized every inch of the property, every blind spot, every elevation. He was not a soldier, but he had trained with enough of them to know how to think like one. Then he heard it, the distant rumble of engines. They were coming. Keanu took a deep breath, steadying himself as he crouched by the open barn doors, his rifle held at the ready. The first truck crested the hill, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Then another. And another. 5 vehicles in total. 15 men, at least. More than before. He waited. The trucks slowed as they approached the farmhouse. The lead vehicle stopped near the burned-down barn, the men inside surveying the ruins. One of them, tall, broad, armed with an AR-15, stepped out and spit onto the ground. "Reeves," he called out into the night. His voice carried easily across the open land. "We know you're here. No need to make this harder than it has to be." Keanu said nothing. The mercenary chuckled and gestured to his men. "Go find him." The first 2 gunmen moved toward the farmhouse, rifles raised. Their boots crunched against the gravel driveway. The others fanned out, checking the barn and the nearby sheds. Then it happened. The first trap was simple, a modified hunting snare. The moment one of the men stepped onto the pressure plate buried under a thin layer of dirt, the mechanism sprang to life. A reinforced steel cable wrapped around his ankle and yanked him off his feet, suspending him upside down. He screamed in shock as his rifle fell from his grasp. The second man turned in alarm, too late. Keanu, perched on the farmhouse balcony, squeezed the trigger. The suppressed crack of his rifle was barely audible over the wind, but the result was immediate. The bullet punched through the second man's chest, dropping him where he stood. Panic erupted. "Contact! Contact!" one of the mercenaries shouted. The others scrambled for cover, ducking behind the vehicles, returning fire blindly at the farmhouse. Bullets shattered windows, punched holes in the wooden walls. Keanu stayed low, moving quickly to his next position. A third mercenary sprinted toward the barn, using its ruined frame for cover. He never saw the tripwire. The moment he stepped through the entrance, the rigged shotgun trap fired, sending a blast of shrapnel into his torso. He collapsed, gurgling. Screams filled the air. Keanu knew he had the advantage of home turf, but he also knew these men would not retreat easily. They were trained killers, not common thugs. And now they were angry. The remaining mercenaries spread out, advancing with caution. 2 of them worked their way around the back of the farmhouse, staying low. Keanu anticipated this and had left a little surprise, a landmine, carefully buried near the chicken coop. One of them stepped right on it. The explosion sent a fireball into the night sky, the shockwave rattling the windows of the house. The other mercenary was thrown to the ground, dazed and bleeding. Before he could recover, Keanu was already there. He moved fast, a knife in his hand. One quick, brutal slash across the throat, and the fight was over for that one. 3 down. The remaining men were now fully aware that they had walked into something far worse than they had expected. The leader, still hiding behind the lead truck, barked orders into a radio. Fall back. Regroup at the trucks. Keanu took aim at the one giving orders. He squeezed the trigger, missed. The mercenary ducked just in time, the bullet sparking off the truck's metal frame. Keanu cursed under his breath. He needed to reposition. Sliding down from the balcony, he moved quickly through the farmhouse. More bullets tore into the walls as the mercenaries laid down suppressing fire. He reached the back door and grabbed the shotgun he had mounted next to it. Time for close quarters. By now, only 4 mercenaries remained. Their leader had been injured, his left arm grazed by shrapnel. The others were rattled, their confidence shaken. Keanu stepped out from behind the barn, shotgun raised. The mercenaries spotted him and opened fire, but he was already moving. He darted between the trees near the fence line, taking cover as rounds whizzed past him. Then, he saw his moment. One of the mercenaries had made the mistake of stepping too far from cover, distracted by the chaos. Keanu didn't hesitate. He squeezed the shotgun's trigger, sending a blast straight into the man's chest. The impact sent him flying backward, his weapon clattering to the ground. 3 left. The remaining mercenaries had had enough. Their leader, bleeding and furious, gestured toward the trucks. We're done here. Fall back. Keanu knew letting them go meant they would return. Stronger. More prepared. But he also knew that for tonight, this battle was over. He watched as they loaded their wounded into the trucks and sped off into the darkness, their tires kicking up dust. The echoes of their retreating engines faded into the night. Keanu stood there for a long moment, his breath steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. His land was littered with bodies, blood soaking into the desert soil. This wasn't over. They would come back. And next time, they would bring everything they had. The silence after the battle was deafening. The faint scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air, mixing with the dry desert wind. Keanu Reeves stood amidst the wreckage of his land, gripping his shotgun as he scanned the darkness, ensuring no threats remained. For bodies lay still in the dirt. Blood pooled in the dust, soaking into the earth beneath his boots. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm, even as his mind raced. He had won tonight's battle, but this war was far from over. Strickland's men had fled, but they would be back. And next time, they wouldn't come in a handful of trucks. They would come in force. Keanu knew he had limited time. He needed to prepare. He moved quickly, dragging the bodies into a shallow ditch near the burned-out barn. He stripped them of their weapons, ammunition, and gear. Assault rifles, pistols, tactical vests, these men had come well equipped, and their supplies would now serve a better purpose. Keanu laid the weapons out on a workbench inside his shed, taking inventory. 5 rifles, 3 pistols, multiple magazines, and a couple of grenades. Not much, but enough to make a difference. He checked his own injuries. A few bruises, a shallow graze along his forearm, but nothing life-threatening. The adrenaline was still masking most of the pain. He ignored it. There was no time for weakness. As he patched himself up with a first aid kit from the farmhouse, he considered his next move. He couldn't just sit back and wait. He had to strike first. Before dawn, Keanu packed a small bag, slung a rifle over his shoulder, and climbed into his old pickup truck. He drove toward town, keeping to the back roads, avoiding main highways. There was someone he needed to see. An hour later, he pulled up to a small, run-down garage on the outskirts of Black Rock. The neon sign flickered, barely illuminating the cracked pavement outside. Keanu stepped out, rifle still slung across his back, and knocked on the metal door. A long pause. Then, the door creaked open just enough for a single eye to peek out. "Jesus, Keanu," a gruff voice muttered. The door opened wider, revealing a stocky man in his late 50s, wearing a grease-stained shirt and a pair of old army boots. "What the hell happened to you?" Keanu stepped inside without a word. The garage was cluttered with tools, engine parts, and a few old motorcycles in various states of disrepair. "Carter," Keanu said finally, meeting the man's gaze. "I need your help." Carter Hayes had been a combat engineer in the Marines before retiring to the quiet life of a mechanic. He had seen his share of war, and more importantly, he knew how to prepare for one. Carter sighed and crossed his arms. "I heard about Strickland's men stirring up trouble, but I didn't think you'd be the one standing against them. They burned my barn. Beat me down. Tried to take everything I had," Keanu said, his voice low. "I gave them what they wanted. They still came back." Carter studied him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he walked to the back of the garage and pulled a dusty tarp off a metal shelf. Underneath was a collection of military-grade equipment, night vision goggles, explosives, and a few well-maintained weapons. "I thought I was done with this life," Carter muttered. "But if you're serious, then we're doing this right." Keanu nodded. The next few days were spent reinforcing the land. Carter helped Keanu set up new defenses, more landmines, reinforced barricades, hidden sniper nests. They crafted homemade IEDs, setting them along key entry points. They modified Keanu's truck, welding armor plates to the doors and reinforcing the engine block. A mounted .50 caliber machine gun in the truck bed completed the transformation. If Strickland's men wanted a war, they were going to get one. Meanwhile, at a remote military compound deep in the Arizona desert, Strickland listened to his lieutenant's report with a cold stare. The survivors of the last raid stood in front of him, their wounds freshly bandaged, their faces still shaken. "He killed 4 of our men," one of them muttered. "Set traps. Sniped us from the barn. It was like he knew exactly what we were gonna do." Strickland exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. "And you just ran?" "There was nothing we could do." The lieutenant never finished his sentence. Strickland pulled his pistol and fired once, putting a bullet between the man's eyes. The others flinched but said nothing as their comrade crumpled to the ground. Strickland turned to the remaining men. "We're not making the same mistake twice." He gestured to a map on the table. "We hit him with everything we've got. No more games. No more warnings. We take his land, burn his house to the ground, and put him in the dirt." One of the men hesitated. "Sir, we're talking about a full-scale assault. That'll draw attention." Strickland's eyes were cold, calculating. "Then we make it look like an accident. A fire. A gas explosion. By the time the cops show up, there won't be anything left of him or his farm." He turned toward a radio on the table and grabbed the receiver. "Get the chopper ready. We end this." Back at the ranch, Keanu and Carter stood on the porch, watching the desert stretch out before them. They knew the fight was coming. They could feel it in the air. "You still got time to walk away from this, Keanu," Carter said quietly. Keanu shook his head. "I don't run." Carter sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Then we make sure they don't leave here alive." The 2 men went back to work. The farmhouse was now a fortress. The traps were set. The weapons were ready. The final battle was coming. And when it did, Keanu Reeves would be waiting. The night was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Keanu Reeves stood on the farmhouse balcony, gripping the railing as he scanned the horizon. The preparations were complete. The land was fortified, the traps were set, and every weapon was loaded. His body was ready, but his mind was sharp, focused. Carter sat on the porch below, smoking a cigarette as he checked his rifle for the 100th time. "You feel it, don't you?" he muttered, exhaling smoke into the cold night air. Keanu nodded. "They're coming." And then, almost as if summoned by the words, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance. This time, there were more of them. A dozen trucks, headlights off, moving like predators in the dark. Dust clouds rose in their wake as they sped across the desert, closing in on the farm. Then came the thudding. The deep, resonant whump-whump-whump of helicopter blades slicing through the air. Keanu looked up and saw the silhouette of a Black Hawk, its dark shape blotting out the stars. A searchlight snapped on, cutting a blinding beam across the land. Carter flicked his cigarette into the dirt. They brought the whole damn army. Keanu tightened his grip on his rifle. Let's give them a proper welcome. The first truck hit the outer perimeter, where Keanu had buried a row of homemade spike strips beneath a thin layer of dirt. As soon as the tires rolled over them, there was a loud pop-pop-pop, the sound of rubber shredding. The truck veered wildly, skidding sideways before flipping onto its roof. Before the mercenaries inside could react, Carter opened fire from the porch, his rifle spitting rounds through the windshield. Glass shattered. Blood sprayed. The truck became a coffin. But the others kept coming. Keanu crouched behind cover, taking precise shots with his thermal-scoped rifle. The orange-hot outlines of the mercenaries lit up in his scope. He squeezed the trigger. One fell. Then another. The remaining trucks fanned out, their doors flying open as men poured out, taking cover behind their vehicles. Bullets tore into the farmhouse, shattering wood, ripping through windows. Carter ducked as splinters flew past his head. They're trying to pin us down. Keanu reloaded. Then we take away their cover. He grabbed the detonator from his belt and pressed the switch. A second later, the landmines hidden near the barn detonated. Fire and shrapnel erupted into the night, flipping a truck onto its side. The shockwave sent 2 mercenaries flying, their screams cut short as they hit the ground, motionless. Chaos. The remaining soldiers began flanking, splitting into 2 groups, one heading for the back of the house, the other moving toward the barn. Keanu was already on the move. The first mercenary to reach the barn kicked the door open, his rifle raised, only to trigger the shotgun trap Keanu had rigged hours earlier. The blast tore through his torso, sending him collapsing backward. His partner hesitated, just long enough for Keanu to step from the shadows, knife in hand. One swift movement, a deep cut across the throat, and the man dropped. Gunfire erupted near the farmhouse. Carter was holding his position, but he was outnumbered. Keanu moved fast, cutting through the darkness like a ghost. Near the back of the house, 3 mercenaries were attempting to breach the back door. Keanu fired from the hip, taking out one. The other 2 spun, raising their weapons, too slow. He slid behind the water trough for cover, then popped up, firing 2 controlled shots. One fell, the other staggered, clutching his wounded leg. Keanu finished him with a single round to the chest. Then he heard it. The unmistakable roar of a minigun spinning up. The Black Hawk loomed overhead, its searchlight sweeping across the battlefield. Then came the BRRRT, the minigun tearing through the air, spitting out hundreds of rounds per second. Bullets shredded the side of the house, splintering wood, ripping through the walls like paper. Carter dove for cover, cursing. They're gonna level this place. Keanu's mind worked fast. The helicopter was their biggest threat now. If they didn't take it down, nothing else would matter. He sprinted toward the shed, dodging gunfire as the minigun chewed through everything in its path. Inside, he grabbed the one weapon that could even the odds, a Stinger missile launcher Carter had procured years ago. Just in case. Keanu emerged from the shed, knelt, and locked onto the chopper. The Black Hawk's searchlight caught him in its beam, and the gunner swung the minigun toward him. Too late. Keanu squeezed the trigger. The missile streaked through the sky, a fiery comet of destruction. The pilot tried to evade, but there was no time. The rocket struck the tail section, detonating on impact. The Black Hawk spun wildly, smoke and flame trailing from its frame. The gunner tumbled from the side as the chopper lost control. A final, desperate scream pierced the night before the wreckage slammed into the desert floor, exploding on impact. For a brief moment, everything went still. Then, gunfire resumed. Strickland had arrived. He stepped out of the last remaining truck, his armor black, his face cold and unshaken. A massive combat knife was strapped to his chest, and in his hands, he held a customized assault rifle. He surveyed the battlefield, unimpressed. "You put up a hell of a fight, Reeves," he called out. His voice carried across the farm, calm, almost amused. "But this ends tonight." Keanu stepped forward, gripping his rifle. The remaining mercenaries regrouped around Strickland, still outnumbering him, but not by much. Carter limped up beside him, reloading his pistol. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Keanu nodded. "We finish this." The final battle had begun. Smoke curled into the night sky, carrying the scent of burning fuel and scorched earth. The wreckage of the helicopter still crackled with dying embers, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. Keanu Reeves stood in the open, his rifle at the ready, facing the last remnants of Strickland's private army. The mercenaries had regrouped, their numbers thinned but still dangerous. Strickland stood at the center of them, his gaze locked onto Keanu with a quiet, deadly intensity. His custom rifle rested easily in his hands, the barrel still smoking from the earlier firefight. Keanu took a slow breath, steadying himself. His body ached from exhaustion, from bruises and cuts, but his mind was clear. This was it. One way or another, it ended tonight. Strickland smirked, lifting his rifle. "You should have taken the easy way out, Reeves." Keanu didn't respond. He pulled the trigger first. The rifle kicked against his shoulder as he fired, dropping one of Strickland's men with a clean shot to the chest. Carter opened fire from the side, taking out another. Chaos erupted. The mercenaries scattered, diving for cover as bullets whizzed through the air. Keanu sprinted toward the burned-out barn, using the wreckage as temporary shelter. He ducked behind a pile of smoldering wood, quickly reloading his weapon. Strickland's voice rang out. "Flush him out." Two mercenaries moved to flank him. Keanu heard them before he saw them, the crunch of boots against gravel. He crouched lower, gripping the combat knife strapped to his vest. The first man rounded the corner. Keanu struck fast. The blade flashed in the moonlight as he drove it deep into the mercenary's side, twisting hard. The man gasped, eyes wide in shock, before collapsing. The second gunman turned in alarm, raising his rifle, too slow. Keanu grabbed the dying man's pistol from his holster and fired twice. The rounds punched into the second mercenary's chest, sending him tumbling backward. Two more down. Keanu exhaled, blood dripping from his blade. But there was no time to rest. Bullets tore through the barn's walls, forcing him to move. He darted toward the farmhouse, where Carter was holding his ground near the porch. The older man was wounded, blood seeped through his shirt, but he kept firing, taking down another mercenary as they tried to rush the house. Keanu slid in next to him, pressing his back against the wall. "You good?" Carter gave a weak grin. "Hell no. But I ain't dead yet." More gunfire. The last few mercenaries were closing in. And then, Strickland stepped forward. Keanu and Strickland locked eyes. The mercenary commander discarded his rifle, pulling the massive combat knife from his chest harness. He rolled his shoulders, flexing his fingers around the handle. "No more running. Reeves," he said. "Let's end this." Keanu nodded. He dropped his own rifle, unholstering his own blade. The weight of it felt familiar in his hand. Carter, still slumped against the wall, groaned. "You guys are really gonna do this old school?" Neither of them answered. They moved. Strickland was fast, faster than Keanu expected. He lunged, his knife slicing through the air. Keanu dodged, sidestepping at the last second. The blade grazed his shoulder, drawing blood. Keanu countered, slashing toward Strickland's ribs, but the mercenary twisted, catching Keanu's wrist with his free hand. He drove his knee into Keanu's gut, forcing him back. They circled each other, breathing hard. Then Strickland attacked again, a flurry of precise, brutal strikes. Keanu blocked the first, dodged the second, but the third cut deep into his side. Pain flared, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. He waited for the opening. Strickland overextended, just slightly, just enough. Keanu struck. His knife plunged into Strickland's stomach. The mercenary froze, his breath hitching. Blood bubbled at his lips. Keanu twisted the blade, then yanked it free. Strickland staggered backward, dropping his own knife. He collapsed to his knees, staring up at Keanu in disbelief. "You," he gasped. "You should have just paid." Keanu wiped the blood from his blade. "I did." Then he drove the knife into Strickland's heart. The mercenary leader exhaled one last breath before his body slumped to the ground. The battle was over. The few remaining mercenaries, seeing their leader dead, fled into the night. Keanu stood there for a long moment, his breathing heavy. The desert wind was the only sound now. No more gunfire. No more screams. Just silence. Carter groaned, pushing himself to his feet. "Remind me to never piss you off, Reeves." Keanu let out a slow breath, finally allowing the exhaustion to settle in. "It's done." Carter looked around at the destruction, the ruined farm, the smoldering vehicles, the bodies. He gave a tired laugh. "Yeah. Guess it is." Keanu gazed out at the land he had fought so hard to protect. It had cost him, but it was still his. The farm would recover. The land would heal. And so would he. Months passed. The farm had changed, but in many ways, it was better than before. The damage had been repaired. The crops flourished. The animals thrived. Carter stayed, helping rebuild. The two men didn't talk about the battle much, but they didn't need to. It was over. One morning, Keanu stood on the porch, watching the sunrise. The light bathed the land in gold, washing away the memories of fire and blood. He had come here for peace. And now, finally, he had found it. The farm lived on. And so did he. The end.